Hello, good evening, or good afternoon, or good morning. I don't know when you're watching this. And welcome to a little pre-show orientation about Hillcrest High School's production of The Hunchback of Notre Dame. I'm going to try to keep this as quick as possible. We started doing these pre-show orientations back when theater was live. And before the show, we'd meet up in my room with audiences that wanted to and kind of explain some things to look for in the show. Um, and so they proved kind of popular, so we've continued doing them. So I'm just going to give you some things to look for as you watch The Hunchback of Notre Dame, whether you're coming to see it live or watching the stream. This is a really fascinating show and a fascinating story, and so hopefully we can give you some really cool things to think about. So a little bit of history. The musical The Hunchback of Notre Dame is based off of a novel by Victor Hugo called Notre Dame de Paris. Lots of people don't know that the novel is not called The Hunchback of Notre Dame. It was written in 1831. It's very early Victor Hugo, about 30 years before he wrote Les Miserables. And so he's still kind of young. I think he's in his 30s when he writes this. In 1923, then, it was turned into a famous silent film starring Lon Chaney that you've probably seen some clips from. Many other film adaptations and other adaptations. Another one you may be familiar with is in 1996, Disney adapted it into an animated musical film that strays greatly from the novel. It has some similar characters who have the same names as people in the novel, but there's a lot of differences. And so in 2014, Disney owned the rights to those songs, with some beautiful songs written by Alan Menken and Stephen Schwartz. And they said, let's make a stage musical out of this in the early 2000s. But they decided that they wanted to have the musical revert back to its roots of the original novel, which kind of had a completely different tone than what the animated film was. And so they decided for that to be their goal. And so in 2014, that show premiered for the first time in the English language, anyways. Yeah, it actually never ended up going to Broadway because Disney was concerned that it would be too. They weren't sure that it would meet the expectations of audiences who were thinking they were going to see a Disney show. Because, like I said, it kind of reverts back to the original Victor Hugo story and his goals for tragedy and what he wanted to accomplish with his art and his stories. So that's what we're going to talk about today. That the stage musical actually doesn't revert completely back to the Victor Hugo. It kind of goes half and half. It's like half the Disney musical animated film, the cartoon, and then half Victor Hugo's novel, and there's things that kind of weave back and forth and come at odds with each other in that. But we'll just give you a little bit of a guide to that. But since the stage show was meant to try to get close to the novel, let's look at the novel. Like I said, 1831 is when it was written, very early Victor Hugo. If you look closely, you don't even have to look closely, if you just look a little bit, you can see that the character of Claude Frollo, one of Victor Hugo's great creations, fictional creations, is kind of an early template for what he does later with Inspector Javert in Les Miserables. It's kind of his first try at an authority figure who is very religious and believes very much in justice and things like that, letting that overcome him and becoming unwittingly a bad person and the villain of a story because he can't see past his religion and his justice and his morals and things like that. So yeah, you can see a little the precursors to Javert in Frollo in this show. Another interesting thing about the novel is when he wrote it, his wife says that he ran out of ink. He had an ink blot and a pen, and the ink bottle ran out as he finished writing the novel. And so she says it should be titled what there is in an ink bottle, because the length of this is exactly the length of an ink bottle and what it takes to write. So, anyways. Okay, so Victor Hugo said that what he wants readers to get from his novel, and I would say we would go along with this too with our production, is that he wants them to realize that it's deeper than story and it's more than entertainment. So if you want the full experience, be ready to go deeper than story, because, and that's going to be important, because if you're very familiar with the cartoon, there's going to be some plot points you'll recognize and then others that you will not at all as far as the story. So don't get confused by that. The goal is not so much connected to the story as it is deeper than that. Also, there's a whole bunch of plot points that aren't really from the novel either that kind of confused me as a director and some of the actors. So we had to go deeper than the story. Whether we're talking the story of the cartoon or the novel. And interestingly, the novel starts with a character named Pierre Gringoire, who is a playwright and a director, and he's putting on a play in the first scene. It's set kind of in the Feast of Fools. And he's having a hard time getting people to pay attention to the, like, deep thoughts and morals that he put into this play, because people were just more focused on the costumes and the sets, and then they get distracted and they create this whole like contest for who's the ugliest person and all of that kind of sets the plot forward. But Victor Hugo starts with us with this very frustrated artist who is like, people are not looking past what's right in front of them to see these deeper things. And I can totally hear Victor Hugo's voice in that, as well as my own sometimes. And so that's what we want. That's what Gringoire at the beginning of the novel wanted for his audience. I think it's what Victor Hugo wanted for his audience is what we want for you guys, to go deeper than story. And we hope you are extremely entertained, but that you also realize this is more than entertainment. Victor Hugo intended for this to be more than that. So what did he intend? Victor Hugo says that one of his purposes for writing the novel was to explore society. He says he calls it a historical novel, that the goal was to explore, and I quote, the state of mind of a population. So this isn't a deep dive into the character of Quasimodo, not even necessarily the character of Frollo or Esmeralda or Phoebus. He wrote this story to explore the state of mind of an entire population. And I think that's an interesting thing to remember as you watch the show, that this is meant to shed some light on a population, not just like individuals. And so what are we learning about society then, and what that means for us today? Just so you know, it's set in 1482 Paris. So, we're 5.5 centuries in the future from that. But hopefully you can see some parallels there. Okay, so I wanted to read you, as we're talking about what Victor Hugo intended, a passage from the introduction to his novel. He got the idea to write this when he was visiting the Cathedral of Notre Dame, and he noticed carved into the wall of a kind of a back tower off to the side, the word, it was written in Greek, but the word has been translated to fatality. And he was just fascinated by that. And the whole idea for the novel came from that, as he wondered what tormented soul lived in this back tower and etched that into, and what is his thoughts about fatality. And anyways, I'll let him explain it to you. This is in Victor Hugo's introduction to his novel. A few years ago, when the author of this book was visiting, or rather exploring, Notre Dame, he found carved by hand on the wall in a dark recess of one of the towers the word fatality. The Greek capitals, black with age and cut quite deep into the stone, the forms and attitudes of their calligraphy which had something peculiarly Gothic about it, as if to show that the hand which had inscribed them there was a medieval one, and above all their grim and fatal import made a keen impression on the author. He wondered, and tried to guess, who the tormented soul might have been who had not wanted to depart this world without leaving behind, on the brow of the old church, the stigma of crime or misfortune. The book was written about that word. Since that seemed to be the main stimulus for everything, and inspires Victor Hugo's writing throughout all of this book, this idea of fatality and what is predestined for us and what are our choices, and And when we give in to things that we feel like, well, that's just my fate, that's just who I am, that's what I have to do, the problems that happen there, and just this whole concept of what is fate, what is fatality, what is our destiny, what is not our destiny, uh, and anyways, that whole exploration you'll find in our production. We did some shout outs in here to that original fatality in our set design, so look for that. Victor Hugo then weaves this in mostly through the character of Frollo, as he imagines Frollo to be the tormented soul who perhaps wrote that in the back corner of the cathedral, as he was dealing with feelings inside of himself. And he creates a lair for Frollo in the novel where he etches things all over. And then one of them, when he is particularly struggling with feelings for Esmeralda, he writes the fatality in the novel. So we've kind of thrown that as a shout out to Victor Hugo into our production, but he wants you to think about that idea of our fate and our agency, and it's a lot to think about and lots of really cool discussions to have. So find me and let's discuss that after the show, because it's crazy. Another thing that I really love that Victor Hugo puts in here is he talks about that in each of us as human beings, we have a space in our soul. I like to think of it as a vacuum. It's like an empty space that he says will be filled. We just have to decide what it's going to be filled with, whether that be something good or something bad. And we all have this, I think of it as a vacuum for passion. And it will be filled. And so if we just focus on like what to keep out, like Frollo kind of does, like don't do this and don't do this and all the knots, it will be filled by something. And then if you aren't in control of what you're filling your vacuum of passion, your space of passion in, it'll overtake you, because it'll fill with something. And he contrasts a lot of different characters with that thought. So that's something to think about too. That's the thing I've honestly been thinking about the most ever since reading this novel last summer, is that idea of what things in our lives are we allowing ourselves to be passionate about, and are they healthy for us, and are they useful? Okay, so the next thing I want to talk about is Victor Hugo was kind of obsessed with architecture and how humanity is recorded through architecture. That's his like big thesis, is that the history of humanity is in our architecture, long before there were printing presses and things like that. And he felt very strongly about this. So he talks about how Notre Dame chronicles the history of a culture completely. And in his introduction, he says, and one day it might go away. We might not have it anymore. And so it's important that we have now literature that can help chronicle that. And I just felt that we need to address that now, since in 2019, we almost lost the cathedral. We've lost a lot of parts of it due to a big fire in 2019. And it felt strange to me to do this production without addressing that, since that was Victor Hugo's whole thing, is that this structure holds the history of a people. So in our production, you'll see that we start in modern day, in the ruins of the current Notre Dame that have been burnt and fallen apart, to remind us our part in society's narrative, the story of this cathedral and this people still being written. And this has been really especially profound in this musical for us. The cast sings a song called Someday, where Esmeralda says that maybe one day, that she has hope that one day in the future, society will have gotten better, and we won't treat people like she was seeing them treat people. And so the show kind of ends with that song, and then someday change will come. And so hearkening our production, we start and then we end in modern day, meant to remind us to look at the story and assess how we're doing with all of this. Have we gotten better? If Esmeralda has seen our day, would it have inspired her? Would she be excited to see that? or would it have been a sad thing for her to see? And so in our production, something unique to our production, like I said, we start and end in the ruins of the modern day Notre Dame to remind us of our role in all of this, and I believe it's hopeful. This is my personal take. I do feel like we are getting better, and by looking closely at these stories, that's how we get better. And so I hope you feel that and can help us with that, getting better at this. Okay, before we're done, I just want to let you know some other cool Easter eggs, for those of you who have not read the novel. If you have read the novel, hopefully you'll catch some of these in our show. I love reading Victor Hugo. I did a bunch of this, and when we did Les Miserables, we put a bunch of little shout outs to people who'd read the novel, just little details that if you don't notice, you don't notice, but they're there. So there's some in this production too. So here's some cool things to look for. First of all is the character of Pierre Gringoire that I mentioned at the beginning, the playwright. He's actually one of the main characters of the novel that is not included in the cartoon. He's not included in the stage show. So we actually cast an actor to portray Gringoire, even though he has no lines in the show. In the book, Gringoire is just really fun. He's my favorite character of the book, to be honest with you. He's very genuine and heartfelt, an interesting contrast to all of the more problematic characters in the novel. He also does lots of tricks in the novel. He's like a performer and a playwright, and he likes to do feats of strength, it talks about. And he likes to spin the chair on his finger and do all sorts of stuff to raise money so he can write his plays. And then when people don't appreciate his plays and they don't become better people because of it, he walks the streets of the town sad because his plays aren't helping humanity like he'd like them to. I freaking love him. He's great. And many times in the play or in the novel, he wears a red and yellow coat thing that they describe. So watch for our Gringoire. A little shout out to Victor Hugo in the original novel there. Also, there's a beautiful subplot in the novel about Esmeralda and her mother that I won't get into here, but it's one of the most tragic things I've ever read about. But Esmeralda does not know who her mother is, and her mother does not know who Esmeralda is. But Esmeralda was stolen when she was a child from her mother, and they left behind one shoe. Esmeralda had one shoe on her foot, and one other one fell off as they were running out of the house when she was stolen. So her mother has kept the shoe to try to find her daughter, and Esmeralda has kept the other shoe on a necklace for her whole life around her neck in the novel. So watch for that. Our Esmeralda has that as kind of a shout out to her mother. Her mother's not in the stage play, but we wanted to kind of respect her and that character and Victor Hugo through the shoe that Esmeralda wears around her neck. And if you ever get the time to read the novel, read it, if nothing else, for the subplot with Esmeralda and her mother, which is so moving and so beautiful. Another thing is there's when in the novel when Quasimodo and Phoebus first kind of interact with each other. Esmeralda's in the tower. It's towards the end of the book, and Quasimodo saved her, but then Phoebus comes in, and she's still really in love with Phoebus. The character of Phoebus in the novel is not as great of a guy as he is in the stage play. He's pretty much a villain in the novel. It's one of the differences. But anyways, Esmeralda is just obsessed with Phoebus and how handsome he is and all of these things. And Quasimodo's, of course, in love with her, but she doesn't really look at him that way because she's kind of distracted by Phoebus and his outward appearance in the novel. And Victor Hugo makes this really cool metaphor one time when they're all three together, and Quasimodo brings her some flowers. And anyways, this is that. This is directly from the novel. Victor Hugo says, "One morning, when she awoke, Esmeralda, she saw on her window 2 vases full of flowers. One was of very fine, very brilliant crystal, but cracked. It had allowed the water with which it had been filled to run out, and the flowers it contained had wilted. The other was an earthenware pot, rough and ordinary, but it had kept all its water, and its flowers were still of a fresh, bright vermilion. I do not know whether she intended it, but La Esmeralda took the wilted bunch of flowers and wore it all day against her breast. That day she did not hear the voice singing from the tower. It's the metaphor that he's setting up there is the Phoebus being this beautiful crystal vase, but it's cracked because he's a problematic human being. And so the water has slowly come out of it and the flowers have died inside of it. And then there's a vase that's not super attractive and earthenware. And those flowers are alive because the water is still there. And she chooses the wilted flowers from the pretty vase. And that's kind of a metaphor of Esmeralda's choice of Phoebus over Quasimodo. So anyways, we look for that metaphor in as a little Easter egg in our production in one of the first times that you see Phoebus and Quasimodo together in the bell tower. Be watching for our vases as another little shout out to Victor Hugo. And then finally, taking us kind of full circle, there's a beautiful passage in the novel where we're in Frollo's kind of back tower of Notre Dame, and he is struggling with what's going on inside of him, and he notices a spider web in his window and a fly that has been caught by a spider in the spider web. And he says this, the priest's haggard blazing eye was riveted on the ghastly small tableau of the fly and the spider. Ah, yes, the priest went on in a voice that seemed to come from his very entrails. It symbolizes everything. She flies. She is happy. She has just been born. She seeks the springtime, the open air, liberty. Oh, yes. But then she comes up against the fatal roseace. The spider emerges, the hideous spider. Poor dancer, poor predestined fly. Let them be. It's fate. Alas, Claude, he's talking to himself. You are the spider. Claude, you are the fly, too. You flew towards knowledge, towards light, towards the sun. Your one concern was to reach the open air, the broad daylight of eternal truth. But as you sped towards the dazzling window that opens onto the other world, the world of clarity, intelligence, and knowledge, your learning did not save you. You did not see, blind fly, the ingenious web fate had spun between you and that light. You hurled yourself against it with all your might, and now, poor fool, you are writhing between the iron antenna of fatality, your head smashed and your wings dismembered. So that's our Victor Hugo's metaphor of Claude Frollo. He is both the spider and the fly. So we've got that in our production too, so watch for that. And when you see that, hopefully you'll be reminded of that from the novel as well. So just some little Easter eggs in there for you to look out for. And then I just wanted to end this by reading Victor Hugo's final passage in the novel at the end of it, because I think it's really beautiful. And some of this passage is written into the script of the musical, so listen for this. He says, this is after all the tragedy of the ending, everything that happens. I won't give any spoilers, but you'll experience it when you watch the show. That's not the ending that the cartoon has. I'll just warn you that. Some more tragic things happen. And then Victor Hugo ends by saying this. About 18 months or 2 years after the concluding events of this history, when they came to the cellar of Montfaucon to fetch the corpse of Olivier le Daim, who had been hanged 2 days earlier and to whom Charles VIII had granted the favor of burial at Saint-Laurent, in better company, they found amongst all those hideous carcasses 2 skeletons, one of which was clasping the other in a strange embrace. One of the 2 skeletons was that of a woman, and still wore a few shreds of a robe of what must have been white material, while round its neck could be seen a necklace of margosa seeds, together with a little silk sachet decorated with green glass beads, which lay open and empty. These objects were of such small value that the executioner had doubtless not wanted them. The second skeleton, which had enfolded the first in a tight embrace, was that of a man. They noticed that its spinal column was curved, that its head was between the shoulder blades, and that one leg was shorter than the other. But the vertebrae of the neck showed no fracture, and it had obviously not been hanged. The man to whom it had belonged must therefore have come there and have died there. When they tried to release him from the skeleton he was embracing, he crumbled into dust. That's how Victor Hugo ends his beautiful novel. It's how the show here ends as well. It's a great tragedy, one of the great tragedies ever written, I think. And tragedy was invented to make humans better. That's what it was invented to do, is to get us to reflect on ourselves and become better. Just what Victor Hugo wanted. It's what the writers of this musical wanted. And so I hope that when you see the show that we can do that together. We can become a little bit better, and that someday will come soon. So thank you, and we hope you enjoy the show.